Thank you for coming back from lunch so promptly. We're going to start our afternoon session. Ms. Pruteau, can you please call the roll?
Kasuga.
Here.
Cervantes.
Here.
Fu.
Aye.
Harbsheets.
Here.
Nystrom.
Here.
Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Here.
Tate.
Here. Perfect, thank you, and quorum is reestablished. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Cervantes to take up item 16D.
All right. So this is our final item, or my final item with the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee for this meeting. Item 16D is possible action on rulemaking regarding 16 CCR sections 1391.1, 1391.2, 1391.5, 1391.6, 1391.8, 1391.10, 1391.11.12, and 1392.1 on psychological associates. This item begins on page 107 of the combined packet, and there were additional materials in the hand carry folder for the board members. Mr. Burke.
Thank you very much. This rulemaking file brings the board in compliance with the changes enacted by Senate Bill 1193, Senate Bill 547, and Senate Bill 801. The amendments to the board's regs clarify the requirements of delegated supervisors and update the registration and renewal process, including 2 new forms which are being incorporated by reference. The package was noticed for a 45-day comment period in June 2022. The rulemaking period ended. There were no comments received. In September 2022, we went out for a 15-day comment period to add and delete some underlying documents and ensuring that the correct minutes were referenced. The comment period ended at the end of September 2022, and the board received no comments at that time. On November 18th, the board reviewed and adopted this regulatory text as noticed and delegated to the EO to make any changes and submit to OAL. The package was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law in December. They had until January the 25th, 2023 to complete their initial review. They did, and they had a number of changes that they requested be made to the packet. We then withdrew the rulemaking file and so that we could make the necessary changes as requested by OAL, go out for another 15-day comment period, and then assuming there are no negative comments, resubmitting to them for final approval. This is an action item, and the action requested is to notice the modified text, including incorporated forms, PSB 100, application for registration as a psychological associate, and PSB 101, notification to add or change a supervisor or service location for a psychological associate, for a 15-day public comment period. If, after the 15-day public comment period, no relevant timely adverse comments are received, adopt the amendments to sections 1391.1, 1391.2, 1391.5, 1391.6, 1391.8, 1391.10, 1391.11, 1391.12, and 1392.1, including the incorporated forms as modified, and authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to resubmit the rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law to complete the rulemaking process, including making any technical or non-substantive changes to the proposed regulations as necessary. The details to what those changes they requested actually are all in the hand carry documents. And if you have any questions about those, our Regulations Counsel, Heather Hoganson, will be able to walk you through them.
So moved, Madam President.
I just want to give Ms. Hoganson an opportunity. Is there anything else that you want to comment on with regards to these changes?
As you'll see from the changes on the forms, it really was just a question of making sure the forms matched the changes that the board had previously made. The fee change regulation specifically leapfrogged this one, and in terms of it getting it passed. And so originally on the form, the dollar amount for the application was the wrong dollar amount. And that's really what OAL was very concerned about, that they thought people might be confused. And the rest of the edits are mostly non-substantive, but it was for full transparency and notice to the public of what's going on. But if you have any questions on any of them in particular, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Mr. Fu?
I was just making the motion and sparing us all from me rereading the text that Mr. Burke so eloquently read.
So your motion is,
The notice, I will read the text that Mr. Burke did. My motion is to notice the modified text, including incorporated forms PSB 100, application for registration as a psychological associate, and PSB 101, notification to add or change a supervisor or service location for a psychological associate, for a 15-day public comment period. If after the 15-day public comment period, no relevant timely adverse comments are received, adopt the amendments to sections 1391.1, 1391.2, 1391.5, 1391.6, 1391.8, 1391.10, 1391.11, 1391.12, and 1392.1, including the incorporated forms as modified, and authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to resubmit the rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law to complete the rulemaking process, including making any technical or non-substantive changes to the
Thank
proposed
you.
regulations as necessary.
I'll second that. All of that.
It's been moved and
I
seconded.
did try to spare you all.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the proposed changes in language here in our packet for 16D. Is there any other comment? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, can we call the roll?
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harb Sheets.
Aye.
Nystrom. Aye. Phillips.
Could you repeat the motion, please? Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Thank you. This concludes the report of the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee for this meeting. Before I finish, I just want to give a special thank you to Mr. Burke for stepping in and preparing so many of the materials and logistics for our legislative meetings this week. I'm sure I only saw a little bit of all of your labor, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cervantes. We're moving on to agenda item number 17. This is the Enforcement Committee report and consideration of possible action on committee recommendations, and Dr. Phillips is the chairperson.
And I'm going to rely on Ms. Monterrubio to kind of take me through this a little bit because, as you know, we've had several iterations of some of these documents in both the package and the hand carry. We'll start with 17A.
Absolutely, and again, I want to apologize for any confusion. Before we get started, so 17A is in the combined package on page 109. 17B is in the hand carry items, page 80. 17C is in the hand carry items, page 97. And 17D is in the combined package on page 128.
You may want to repeat those as we get to each of them.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So starting with 17A, that is consideration of and possible action on committee recommendations. So the Enforcement Committee and staff began a comprehensive review of all enforcement-related sections of the Business and Professions Code, and attached are the sections that we'll be reviewing, which is 2995 to 2999. I don't know if everyone can see the screen here, but you have the sections on your electronics. So the first section that the committee made, and the only section the committee made recommendations to, is 2995. So Dr. Phillips, do you want to?
Does anyone have any comments on, any board members have comments on section 2995? Okay, we'll move on to 29. Is that the only section we changed in that?
That is the only section.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a, a motion, excuse me?
I second.
And direct the staff to seek an author? Okay.
Is the board interested in just a very quick summary as to why the changes are there? Or,
Very quick.
you'll see a little bit farther down, Moscone-Knox Act and some recommended changes, or to seek some recommended changes there, where it lists the license categories for those who can be shareholders, officers, directors of a psychological corporation, and this is simply to make it consistent with what is in Moscone-Knox and what will be sought as a small change to Moscone-Knox. So it's really just making those consistent.
Ms.
Sorry.
Riscati?
Would wellness coaches fall into this? No.
Since they're not included in Moscone-Knox, my understanding, though, they would not be included in our Practice Act. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe Moscone-Knox lists all of the categories that are there, plus the ones that the board is seeking to add. And the difference, as you'll see a little bit later, is that Moscone-Knox lists naturopathic doctors, and I think the board will seek a change to refer to it as licensed naturopathic doctors. So this will make it consistent with that. So both statutes have the same list. Does that help?
Yes.
Was that fast enough, Dr. Phillips?
It does. Is there any more board discussion or comment? Any public comment on this scintillating agenda item? Hearing none, Ms. Berteau, could you call the roll, please?
You need public comment?
I did ask for public
Oh,
comment.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear it either.
The crowd rushed up.
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes. Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheets.
Aye.
Nystrom. Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Thank you.
So the next item is 17B, and again, that is in the hand carry on page 80. So the Enforcement Committee and staff did a review of the Corporation Code Sections 13401 to 13410. The committee does recommend minor changes to Section 13401 and 13401.5 subsection C9. The action requested is the committee recommends the board approve the committee's recommended changes to Corporations Code Section 13401, 13401.5C subsection 9, and direct staff to seek an author for the proposed changes for inclusion in singular or omnibus legislation.
So moved.
Second?
So, do we have any discussion of the motion or any particular section people would like to discuss? These are obviously very technical things that we went through in the Enforcement Committee with the able assistance of Ms. Marks and Ms. Hoganson, and happily, we're bringing everything in kind of conformity with everything else. Would you like to
The only
sum?
section that is not necessarily just to make the Corporations Code consistent with BMP is Section 13401, which seeks to add the Board of Psychology into the list of agencies or boards for which professional corporations do not have to seek registration with their boards. This board has not registered professional corporations, and I think does not wish to, so putting Board of Psychology in that list would then exclude them from the requirement of registration of professional corporations with the board.
Correct. Any further discussion on the motion by board members? Any public comment?
Hi, Dr. Elizabeth Winkleman again. I just wanted for clarification for Ms. Marks. There's no current obligation to register psychological corporation with the board, is there?
No, well, the board has been asked about registration because it's not specifically listed in 13401. As I understand that the board has never required registration because it used to be under the umbrella of the medical board, and the medical board is excluded. And the psych board kind of took that exclusion with them when they left the umbrella of the medical board, but now, in order to clarify that, putting the board name in section 13401 will make that clear that registration is not required. But this board does not have a process for registering professional corporations,
Good.
so that just clarifies that.
Thanks. Okay.
Any other public comment? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Berteau, could you call the roll, please?
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes. Aye. Fu.
Aye.
Hardsheets.
Aye.
Nystrom. Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 17C, which is the hand carry, page 97. So the Enforcement Committee and staff did a review of the California Code of Regulations, section 1397.35 to 1397.40. The committee does recommend minor changes to some of these sections. In California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1397.35, Requirements for Professional Corporations, the committee recommends updating the list of licensees who can be a shareholder in a professional corporation to match the statutory language in the Corporations Code subdivision, subsection C of Section 13401.5, as shown in the attachment to Agenda Item 17B. Because the Authorizing Business and Professions Code statute, Section 2995, described in Agenda Item 17A, also needs minor cleanup, staff recommends updating the statute first and then the regulation to follow. In California Code of Regulations, Section 1397.37, shares, ownership, and transfer, the committee recommended updating the pronouns his or her, or he or she, with the gender-neutral pronouns their or they, respectively. This non-substantive change was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law and approved effective January 19th, 2023. In California Code of Regulations, Section 1397.39, corporate activities, the committee recommended inserting serial commas for clarity. This non-substantive change was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law and approved effective January 19th, 2023. The committee had no recommended changes to California Code of Regulations, Section 1397.40, trusts. And I will defer to Dr. Phillips since he has a motion.
I do have a motion, and it's gone through several drafts, and I'm just looking for the motion. Here it is. I move that the board approve for noticing the proposed regulatory text to amend Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 1397.35, regarding requirements for professional corporations once legislative updates are made to the Corporation Code and to Business and Professions Code as directed in Agenda Items 17A and B. And to direct staff to submit the text and related documents, to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review, and upon approval, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary, it's got a lot more to go, to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive or technical changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing only if requested. If no comments requiring board response are received during the 45-day public comment period, and no hearing is requested, adopt the proposed text of Section 1397.35 as noticed, and authorize the executive officer to take all necessary steps to complete the rulemaking process. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you.
I have a question. On line 17, it references licensed midwife. On line 23, it just references midwives. Should it be consistent, like licensed? I thought I saw,
It's a fair question. Ms. Marks? Or
It
Ms.
does
Hogan?
say licensed on line 21. So it says licensed clinical social workers, and I think that applies to everyone listed thereafter.
and then in the previous one we looked at, I thought license was struck out in B. 17B.
So are you referring to 13401.5 subsection C? 9?
I think so. I flipped.
So that's on line, if that's what you're referring to, Ms. Nystrom, that's on line 19, and we added licensed, and then we just, if that's what you're referring to.
Mr. Fu?
It's because I think when we had, I remember this discussion in Enforcement Committee, it's because on line 17, we state that professional services who are licensed as, and then we listed all the professions. When we added surgeons, naturopathic doctors, or midwives, we inadvertently added licensed midwives in there, not recognizing we had the modifier at line 17 already.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Is there any amendment required? Or are we going with the language as presented?
I don't see any amendment required to
Okay.
the language, no.
Thank you very much.
When the board is ready, I do have a comment about the motion. I'll wait till you're done.
You can go.
At the risk of Ms. Sarks shooting lasers out of her eyes in my direction, I might suggest that because you won't even be, the board will not even be seeking legislative changes for at least a year from now, you're at least 2 years away from looking at potential reg changes. So to prospectively adopt regulatory language is a little bit premature. I don't see a problem with authorizing the EO to begin the rulemaking process. I might want to make it a little broader. Ms. Hoganson can speak to this, but there's a possibility that the changes could be made through what's called a Section 100, meaning that it's without substantive change. The way the motion is drafted, it directs staff to go through the regular rulemaking, so I might make it a little broader and leave out any references to adopting the language, because you're so far ahead of even the authorization to do it. And this way, it would give Ms. Sorek the option potentially of initiating the legislative change as a Section 100, or if it's not allowed, then to go the regular rulemaking. So that's just my suggestion. I would offer other language if I can get far enough away from Ms. Sorek to save myself. So I'll offer that language if the board is
Ms.
interested.
Hoganson?
It is true that if, once this goes through the legislative process, sausage being as it is, it could come out in such a way that we could do a non-substantive change, which is what we did to the other two sections. It was discussed in the committee meeting on, I think, December 16th in the morning, and in the afternoon, I sent it over to OAL as a non-substantive change, and that's why it got done so quickly. If the statutory changes are such that we can do that, we absolutely will. That saves everybody a lot of time and money and trees being massacred. So that's all good. Not having a motion to adopt means that if there was language that was discretionary in OAL's, in the Office of Administrative Law's great wisdom, it would have to come back here for another motion. But again, that's a couple of years from now, probably after the legislation dust is settled.
Well, my thought is that the actual types of changes we're talking about are not policy changes. These are just technical changes that are being made for purposes of bringing everything into conformity. So my preference would be to continue with the motion so that we don't have to revisit this topic again unless it's necessary to do so. But if anybody has strong feelings to the contrary, I'm certainly open to hearing them.
I think as a practice, having the discussion now about the changes, which won't even be authorized to look for for a couple years, then I think puts the public at a disadvantage. But you certainly can. I just think you have several years to do it.
Are there any further board comments on the motion? Yes. Sure.
Ms. Sork, when you say the public is going to be at a disadvantage, what do you mean by that?
What do I mean by the?
You used the phrase the public is going to be at a disadvantage, and I'm just curious what you mean by that.
What I mean is that the discussion, and Dr. Phillips is absolutely right. This is not a policy-heavy action at all. So that's why I'm really referring to getting into the practice of doing this. I don't think it's as big an issue here, but where the discussion is happening now, but the authorization won't even be in place for at least 2 years. So you're looking at 2.5 years to start the rulemaking process. You're so far down the line, and you've prospectively adopted the language, because the language of the motion is, we will adopt, it is essentially adopted 3 years from now, while the public would be getting any of the documents if they're on the interested parties list. They don't have the same context as if the conversation is happening much more closely to the time that the rulemaking is initiated. So that's where I think I would recommend potentially not getting into the habit of prospectively adopting language that won't even be an issue for several years down the road. The other thing is potentially hamstringing future board members. Again, this one, I don't think you've got a lot of controversy here, but getting into that habit, you're hamstringing potentially future board members from engaging in that conversation because you've discussed it here, authorized a change here, and somewhere down the line, there are other board members who may have had a different input into the conversation.
I would think for some issues, I can see where that's definitely an issue. I don't think it's an issue here. And with the legislation being offered that we're trying to conform to, the public will have an opportunity to comment on the legislation when it comes before the legislature.
Correct. As I say, with this one, I don't see a particular, any particular harm, and I wouldn't even bring it up if I thought that the legislative changes would be sought this legislative period, but they're not going to be. And I really offer it as kind of an approach for the future for items that are much more policy-heavy, to potentially look at the practice of prospectively adopting language at the time you're making the motion when there is no, not even if there is authority, to kind of cut out that process. I know that this became almost a necessary way of doing business during the pandemic and the difficulty in getting quorum to meet. Hopefully, we won't be facing that again. So I would just offer that as a review of the practice when you are able to meet regularly, to start looking at having these conversations a little bit more closely to the time you have the authority to initiate the rulemaking.
Well, thank you for that. That's interesting. Any further board comment? Yes.
Ms. Sorick, is this reflecting on Ms. Mark's comments, is this an exception to our practice, or is this something that we've exercised this legal practice before with regard to more substantial items?
We haven't. In fact, when we were just, as Ms. Marks was talking, I was thinking we have kind of been in this practice historically with our pathways to licensure, statutory and regulatory language. We did them as a team approach where we looked at all the language as a whole. We did it with all of our enforcement statutes and regulations when the committee looked at line by line, all the statutes and regulations relating to enforcement. And this was the third time that we've done this, where we took a policy concept like corporations code language, and we looked at statutes and regulations and reviewed the language in a holistic one-time review. So this is the third time we've done this, and the regulatory process does take some time, as we all know. And that's not because Ms. Hoganson isn't super speedy on her end, which she is, but there's outside forces that are non-Section 100s that take a little longer. So that practice does exist, and there is opportunity for additional changes in the future. I will point to our disciplinary guidelines as a prime example of a document that has become a real living document and has had several iterations and additional changes since Ms. Akwebudu was on the board. So that practice does exist, and there are additional opportunities on the back end if additional changes need to be made. I would say there's a 15-day notice process and infrastructure in place if that should happen, and plenty of opportunity for public comment and input.
Thank you, that's really helpful. You get to keep your second, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you. Any further board comment? Any public comment? Ms. Berteau, could you call the roll, please?
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harb Sheets.
Aye.
Nystrom. Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate. Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
And for your convenience, Ms. Berteau, I will forward you that motion.
The last and final item is 17D, and that's in the combined packet on page 128. And at this time, I would like to invite Christian Lavarello, the probation monitor, to present this item.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to start off by thanking everybody for the time for allowing me to present today. My name is Christian Lavarello. I am the board's probation monitor. I have been in the role of the board's probation monitor since August of 2022. Prior to being the probation monitor, I was conducting desk investigations, also within the Board of Psychology. Since moving into the probation monitor position, I have identified some opportunities to refine our current process and implement some changes to the way probationers are being monitored, to ensure that the board adheres to its mandate of public protection and also streamline our probation program to create a more transparent relationship with our probationers. What is probation? The purpose of probation is to ensure public safety by monitoring the licensee's work, performance, drug screenings, and a multitude of other conditions. Probation, in a sense, is an ongoing investigation to ensure public safety and enforce the terms and conditions of their order. Individuals are placed on probation by way of a stipulated settlement worked out through board enforcement staff, through the Office of the Attorney General, or a proposed decision written by an administrative law judge, both of which are voted upon by the board. Orders can include standard terms of condition of probation, which are found on page 747 of the law book. These can include coursework, probation cost, obeying all laws. Orders can also include optional conditions of probation, found on page 736. These can include actual suspension from practice, psychological evaluations, or abstaining from drugs and alcohol, all of which depend on the circumstances leading to the discipline. Once probation has been ordered through a quorum of the board, we receive the decision 30 days prior to the effective date of their probation. My job as the board's probation monitor is to independently oversee the probation program. I monitor each individual whose license or registration to practice has been administratively disciplined. I review and enforce the terms and conditions of the order and do my best to provide each probationer the necessary tools and resources to be successful. If non-compliance is found, it is my responsibility to ensure the necessary action is taken. New probationer. Once it is ordered that an individual will be placed on probation, the enforcement analyst provides a copy of the disciplinary order, accusation, or statement of issues to me. Within 7 days of receipt of the order, I review the entire order, summarizing the underlying cause of discipline. I create a detailed probation file, listing all applicable due dates and any special notes or conditions found within their order. This is used for monitoring purposes during the entire term of their probation. The new probationer is provided with a pre-orientation packet introducing myself as their probation monitor and a thorough list of all applicable conditions with due dates and initial forms. During the probation intake orientation meeting, I meet with each new probationer within the first 2 weeks of their probation effective date. The meeting takes place via Teams through a audio and video interface. During the intake meeting, we review the details of their order and we discuss all the terms and conditions of their probation. This provides an opportunity to explain the conditions in depth and to answer any questions they may have. I also use this meeting. The probationer has the option to petition the board for early termination of probation pursuant to BNP Code 2962. The board can grant or deny their petition. The probationer can allow the passage of time, and if they are in compliance with each condition of probation, successfully complete.
How they come into play here in the flow you described?
Sure, that's a great question. So currently we have, aside from the 45 probationers who are active, we have 19 probationers who are told. Probationers who are told they still have to follow certain terms and conditions of their order. They are not practicing. However, they do have to submit quarterly reports that attest to non-practice. And they also are required to make payments towards cost recovery. I'm hoping that kind of covers your question as far as like what terms and conditions they're still required to comply with.
I think, yes, it is helpful. I think it's just important to see like that whole picture, right? Because you're monitoring about 65 people that are in this process. And then I'm curious, you may not know yet, but maybe Ms. Monterrubio knows. Out of the folks who are placed on probation, do you know about what proportion might finish probation successfully? Or do we lose many out of the profession along the way? I'm just curious about that.
I'm afraid I don't have a exact stats to provide as far as like, from my experience, I don't recall a probationer who perhaps left the profession. Perhaps they told their probationary status, but I can't recall. Maybe Ms. Monterrubio can provide more insight.
Thank you, Dr. Cervantes. Are you asking if probationers surrendered their license voluntarily, or are you asking if we sought revocation down the road once they're on probation?
My question is if they fall out of the probation period, or of the probation process, which could be either.
Okay, so if we get a complaint while somebody is on probation, as Christian mentioned, we can request, depending on what that violation is, of course, we could request that the Attorney General's office file an accusation and petition to revoke. That doesn't mean we would get revocation. We could get an extension of probation, or we could get revocation. That's a very small percentage. I don't have the exact number, but most probationers are successful. A few years ago, we had a lot more than 92 that were told, and they were told for 10 plus years. And what tolling is, that means you either practice or reside out of the state, or you could stay here and decide that you just don't want to continue to practice. And it's actually item number 24 in the disciplinary guidelines. So we did contact a lot of these told probationers and sent them a letter asking if they'd like to surrender, since it had been a very long time since they'd been practicing in California. So we reduced that number significantly, and we do that occasionally, just letting people know that you can surrender, and so you don't have to submit quarterly reports, you don't have to pay the cost recovery, you can just stop being on probation. But it's a very, very small percentage for those that get additional discipline, such as revocation, if they're already on probation. But again, most probationers are successful in the program.
Thank you. These thoughts come to mind sometimes when we're dealing with the petitions for early probation, and just thinking about the circumstances and the whole of the situation for that individual. And so I was curious of what it looked like more broadly. So thank you for that. I don't have
Thank
any
you.
other
We
questions.
appreciate the question.
Mr. Fu?
I have a question which you don't have to answer today, and a follow-up by email would be more than okay, which is, what is for each of the tests you described for substance use, what is the ability to test if a person has been using within a given time period? So for example, if alcohol was one of the things that we were testing for, what would the urine sample pick up in terms of how many days? What's the window, right? Is it like a 12-hour window, or is it a 2-week window? I would just be curious, follow up by email is more than fine, to look at that, because one of the questions I've always had is, if a person misses, their appointment one day, why couldn't this just go the next day? Like, if the tests provide a larger window, but that's all.
That's a great question. Actually, from the top of my head, I do know for urine it's 7 days, and for blood is 1 month. Now it depends on the drug. I would have to probably contact my contact at Vault Health to get more exact information. Depending whether it's alcohol, drug, and I'm not sure about hair, how long that would be.
So sorry, Dr. Phillips.
I was just going to say that the hair sample typically allows you to look at a longer period of time in terms of drug and alcohol history. It also depends on the amount of the alcohol or drug they take. So if you only had one drink the day before, it might be out of your system. If you, excuse the expression, got hammered the day before, it would probably still be in your system when you went in for a drug test the next day. So I think there's a lot of variables.
And just to answer the second part of your question regarding why they, during a petition or however it may come up, if they don't test on one day, why wouldn't we allow them to test on the next day? My job as a probation monitor is to make sure that I follow the order, and there's certain language right on the disciplinary guidelines that dictate what they have to follow, and these are terms and conditions that the probationer themselves have already agreed to follow. And I know that it may seem as though it's just 1 day. Why wouldn't we just allow them to do that? However, it's part of our protection to the public and making sure that they are following those same exact terms and conditions as they're written in the order.
That's really helpful, and I would, Dr. Phillips, I would welcome a learning session for the Enforcement Committee about, one, I totally appreciate the position you're in, and two, what would the implications be if we were to entertain a a makeup test the next day, just as a study session, not as a,
Well, that would require a legislative change, as I understand it. I think we are required as a board to enforce the guidelines in the way that the legislature largely drafted the guidelines after some controversy among DCA agencies and whether they were actually adequately following up on substance using licensees. So it's not like we could change the policy, number one. Number two, the idea behind random drug testing is that people will never know when they're going to get tested, so that they have to be abstinent all the time if they want to come back with clean tests. If you were to give them a lag time in order to do that, then you've kind of defeated the purpose of the random drug testing.
I understand. As science is progressing, and it appears that you're able to detect certain substances with up to a month period, depending on the amount taken in, et cetera. I would just be interested in understanding and learning with the mindfulness that does take staff time and that does take away from other priorities. So it doesn't have to be at the next one or the one after that, but preferably in 2023 would be fantastic. But
Ms. Thorick?
I would actually suggest that based on the discussion today, and I think it would be worthwhile for us as well at maybe our next 2-day board meeting where we have the opportunity and the ability to have a presenter. Perhaps we can ask our vendor to send a representative to talk to us about this issue. We do pay for this service. They have a contractual agreement with us, so I'm sure they would be more than happy to talk about the testing and.
Come and charge us?
So if you're amenable to that, Mr. Fu, I think that might be illuminating.
I'm always amenable to any ideas from our executive officer, and so it was your idea to put this on the board agenda. I am happy to defer to you.
Particularly when the genesis of the idea is Mr. Fu's.
But I think, I just want to add, I think it's a good idea because at times, when someone is petitioning for an early termination, we have had to discuss circumstances by which they missed a test. And some of us who are not trained in the profession don't know how to weigh that, I think. So it would be helpful.
I think actually it's a fantastic idea, and I think we could probably all better understand it, keeping in mind that there's not a lot of room for variability in the substance abusing guidelines, because the legislature is very clear about the fact that they want them observed strictly. And, sometimes there are unfortunate situations where people can't get tested. Other times, we're not quite sure whether people are being completely honest with us. So it's it's a difficult situation, I think, all the way around. I personally, not as a board member of the Board of Psychology, but as a practicing psychologist, feel like the substance abusing guidelines, to a certain extent, are kind of a recipe for failure, because I think they increase the amount of stress on substance abusing people, which makes it more difficult for them when they have to get tested 52 times a year, for instance. But the legislature didn't ask me about the advisability of passing the statute, so I guess they weren't interested in my opinion. There was another subject are there any further board comments? Any public comments on the probation overview? Okay, seeing none, and it's not an action item, but there was one other question that we were going to talk about, and perhaps either Ms. Monterrubio or Mr. Lavarello could illuminate what that question is.
So during our last enforcement committee meeting, I provided an overview of enforcement and sort of an update, and we discussed some of the changes, perhaps opportunities I have seen, and in one of them being just an example, when we receive psychotherapy reports for a probationer who has been ordered to have psychotherapy. A lot of times the order states specifically that the session must be of 1 hour at least. However, a lot of times that's not the case. So it opened up another area of discussion around what is considered a therapeutic hour. And so today, at this time, we're going to discuss that. And Dr. Tate, if you'd like me, I can read the psychotherapy term.
Absolutely.
And it's term number 6 in the disciplinary guidelines.
Within 90 days of the effective date of this decision, a therapist shall be selected by the respondent for approval by the board. The therapist shall, number 1, be a California licensed psychologist with a clear and current license. Number 2, have no previous business, professional personal or other relationship with respondent. And number 3, not be the same person as respondent's monitor. Respondent shall furnish a copy of the decision to the therapist. Psychotherapy shall, at a minimum, consist of at least 1 hour per week over a period of 52 consecutive weeks, after which it may continue or terminate upon the written recommendation of the therapist, with written approval by the board or its designee. The board or its designee may order a psychological evaluation upon receipt of the therapist's recommendation. Respondent shall execute a release authorizing the therapist to provide to the board or its designee any information the board deems appropriate, including quarterly reports of respondent's therapeutic progress. It shall be respondent's responsibility to ensure that the required quarterly reports are filed by the therapist in a timely manner. If a therapist notifies the board that the therapist believes the respondent cannot continue to safely render psychological services, upon notification from the board, respondent shall immediately cease accepting new patients, and in accordance with professional standards shall appropriately refer, terminate existing patients within 30 days, and shall not resume practice until a board-appointed evaluator determines that respondent is again safe to practice. The term of probation shall be extended by the period of time of which respondent is ordered to cease practice. If prior to the termination of probation, respondent is not found to be mentally fit to resume the practice of psychology without restrictions, the board shall retain continuing jurisdiction over the respondent's license, and the term of probation shall be extended until the board or its designee determines that the respondent is mentally fit to resume the practice of psychology without restrictions. The cost of therapy is to be paid by the respondent.
So the particular question that came up in the enforcement committee was, when we say that they have to have therapy for 1 hour, are we saying that they have to have a 60-minute therapy session when most therapeutic hours are 45 or 50 minutes? So I'd be interested to hear what other board members have to say on the topic.
I have of course, I'm not a practitioner in psychology, but I interpreted the 1 hour as not just the therapy part, but the process of going into a space, sitting down, like all the other stuff that has to happen in that hour of time for the practitioner. It might still be an hour of time with the person, is how I interpreted that.
Yeah, that's not the case. Otherwise, we would never have time to go to the bathroom. Or have a Diet Coke. The therapy hour starts when you bring the patient into the room and goes till the end of typically 45 or 50 minutes, at which point you invite them to leave, and in whatever way people handle that. So typically it's from when they first cross the threshold of your office until they leave your office, correct?
Correct. The therapy hour is 45 minutes to 50. I mean, it can go longer. But I think if we accepted 45 minutes, that would qualify, in my mind, as an hour of therapy.
And I think the question is, when we're looking for psychologists that will give this treatment, and their schedule's based typically on a 45 or 50-minute hour. So to ask them to make it into a 60-minute hour in order to meet our guidelines doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and be very disruptive, and it might create a disincentive to taking the patient.
Oh, yeah.
Ready? I was going to say, I think the 50-minute hour is the standard we all were received in school, which has shifted a little bit to the 45-minute hour at the larger organizations, Kaiser, the VA, things like that.
office.
So, and your office, and Dr. Harbsheet's office, yes. But I think 45-minute, 50-minute is definitely within, that's a therapeutic hour.
Ms. Nystrom.
Question, are there situations where 30 minutes would be considered somebody's hour, or is it?
No.
There-
That would be
there is-
considered half a session.
Well, there is a procedure code for 30 minutes, but I don't think that would qualify for what
Well, I
we're
guess that's what I'm just
asking.
making sure that,
People can do shorter than 45 or 50 minutes. The insurance codes change, but it wouldn't be considered a therapeutic hour. It would be considered part of a therapeutic hour, I believe.
So is the question, should we change the language, or should we change how we're interpreting what an hour, what qualifies for an hour?
My preference would be to change the interpretation just so that there's a workable model for probation to use, unless there's a strong feeling by legal counsel that we need to make it into, we need to make it more explicit, which will require, what, a regulatory change? Yes.
So if I may, I know the board has looked at the disciplinary guidelines a number of times and has already actually made some suggested language changes to this model language paragraph. And it could be as easy as directing staff to further amend this paragraph to specify, and we could just do it with a parenthetical to specify that for purposes of this section, a therapeutic hour equals a minimum of 45 minutes. And that way, it's clear in the decision language, and anyone that has, gets a copy of that decision, that they know that a 45 or 50-minute therapy session is okay to meet this standard.
Are those standards still, they're still in process, aren't they?
Because I think we touched this last, a couple meetings ago, when we added the orientation change efforts, the minimum disciplinary guidelines penalty for that in the disciplinary guidelines. We added that, and then we added something to the testing frequency, the little box with the information about if someone goes on vacation, the allowance for the testing to be reconsidered or what have you. But I'm wondering if, and I'm not sure if this is Ms. Mark's question in conjunction with Ms. Hoganson question. I think it's a good idea to make this concrete in the disciplinary guidelines for ongoing, but is this something that procedurally the staff can start, use, I'm losing my words. Is this something that we can operationalize now as a form of moving forward? That Mr. Lavarello can look at the hour being not 60 minutes?
In my opinion, yes, for a couple reasons. One, a therapeutic hour seems to have an actual meaning in the profession. And two, you're actually making it easier for probationers to comply. So I think you could interpret it in that way. I do think, I agree that it would probably be the best course of action if it can be added to say something like 1 therapeutic hour per week, and then parentheses, which consists of at least 45 to 50 clock minutes, or something along those lines.
And if I may, Ms. Sorek, it also could be added to stipulated settlement language, because that is negotiated as you went forward. Just right now, you could start doing it that way. The ALJs wouldn't get the language until the regulation was adopted, but.
So do we need to address this today in this meeting, or should we send it back to Enforcement Committee for purposes of a recommendation of the board?
I would suggest that if the board is amenable to codifying what an hour is, that we can then add it to the existing disciplinary guidelines package, which Mr. Polk is probably very excited to delve into, because it's going to be a really light regulatory package for him. So I would recommend the board address that today if possible.
Okay.
You made him blush.
Could I borrow your book for a second?
And I do have
I know it's in
some
the
sample
documents.
language if you'd like.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
So you could do a motion as simple as you move to direct staff to amend Condition 6 of the optional terms and conditions in the board's disciplinary language as revised April 2015, which is incorporated in 16 CCR 1395.2 to specify that a therapeutic hour equals a minimum of 45 minutes.
That sounds super. I will move that.
I will second.
Oh.
We have multiple seconds. Ms. Kasuga is seconded. Or Dr. Kasuga, excuse me. Is there any discussion among the board members? Is there any public comment? Hearing none. Ms. Proto, could you please call the roll? And I'm sure that Ms. Hoganson would be happy to share that language with you.
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harb Sheets.
Aye.
Nystrom. Phillips.
Aye. Oh,
Riscati.
aye.
Aye. Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Let's take a quick break. Let's say 5 minutes, please. 3:15. Thanks.
Kasuga.
Here.
Cervantes.
Here.
Fu.
Aye.
Harb Sheets.
Here.
Nystrom. Phillips.
Here.
Riscati.
Here.
Rogers.
Here.
Tate.
Here.
Roll is complete.
Perfect. We're all back. Quorum is reestablished. And I think we're going to dive into item number 18, review and propose edits to the board publication For Your Peace of Mind, a consumer's guide.
Could I make one comment before that?
Can I finish my sentence?
Yes, you can.
A consumer's guide to psychological services. And Dr. Phillips.
We're all getting a little testy at this point. I just wanted to say thank you very much to Mr. Lavarella for a great presentation.
That was a nice presentation.
It's really helpful to help us better understand it. And that's all I had to say, Madam.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me finish my sentence. I appreciate that. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, President Tate, Vice President Rogers. Item 18 is a continuation of the discussion that the board had in November, where they went through the revision to this document. At that time, several changes were made, which are reflected in the materials, but the board did delegate to Drs. Kasuga and Harb Sheets to prepare language on assessment, and to Dr. Phillips to prepare some language about third-party entities. This language was submitted to staff, it was incorporated into the document, and is now submitted for your review and approval. Thank you.
So I think the easiest way, I say easy, is just to go page by page, unless, Mr. Burke, are you thinking something different?
Unfortunately, no, not at this time.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate your candor. Let's go page by page. Thank you. And thank you to Drs. Harb Sheets, Kasuga, and Phillips for your language. Any changes to page 1? Is that the entire page 1, though? No. Oh, okay. So any board comments for page 1 additions? Just the three of you giving us your changes, and we can move on from there. I love it. Okay. Who would like to go for Dr. Harb Sheets? Would you like to? Oh, perfect. Dr. Kasuga, please lead the way.
Okay, so I'll start with, we only changed 3 sections. We'll start with number 2, which is page 142 of the combined packet. Dr. Harb Sheets and I updated the list of psychological tests. So it just organized them into the different types of evaluations that we think fit together. So we put diagnostic evaluations in one section and gave a few examples of the most common ones. We included disability and workers' compensation evaluations together. We put fitness for duty below, together with the other forensic evaluations and court-ordered evaluations. And we just wanted to get feedback, I guess, on the way we organized those assessments. And we tried to be kind of like representative, and we included career counseling and planning evaluations as well.
We wanted to group them so they made sense, instead of just individually listing ones that looks more hodgepodgey.
My only suggestion is to say court-ordered or court-related.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
Yeah.
Because some of them are not ordered, but are related.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Cheryl explaining. Sorry, yeah. Oh, it's clear now. So is someone going to, oh, sorry. Oh, it's happening, sorry.
Yeah, we can't see it over here, so we don't know. No,
court
court-ordered and court-related.
And I have a question.
Should it be or, yeah?
Or,
the second item is struck out, perform intelligence and achievement evaluations. I imagine those are outdated terms?
They're above and diagnostic evaluations. It's,
Category right
Oh,
above it.
they just moved it.
oh, I see. I see how the grouping is. Okay.
And usually the achievement tests are part of like a bigger battery of intelligence tests, so it's just like used one of them.
Do we need to spell out ADHD for this purpose of the section? Or is ADHD already pre-referenced?
I think it was pre-referenced. Oh, got it.
Do we need to spell out ADHD when the addition of ADHD evaluation? I did a Control F and I didn't find ADHD in the previous pages, and for purposes of.
I would say spelling it out is appropriate.
well, they're
Slash
examples, and I do
hyperactivity.
think that's a fairly common type of testing.
But yes, writing convention though, abbreviations mentioned once.
We can do you want to do the full thing? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
Attention
in
dash
caps, and it's attention dash
deficit slash hyperactivity disorder.
I didn't get what you were saying. I
People
thought you
don't do
wanted
that
it off the
like,
list, but
correctly all the
you
time.
said something. I'm sorry.
No, you got it. Yes.
But it's a forward slash.
The dash is after attention.
Slash.
It's a slash, but he has the slash. No, in the DSM-5, it's a slash. Yes, it is.
In the DSM-5-TR, it's a space, but I think in most other references, it's a slash, because people oftentimes don't have both components.
Should we use the TR? Yeah, the most recent one.
So should we do a space?
Go with the TR.
I don't think the consumers are going to be scratching their heads over it anyway. Space.
Space.
Dr. Kasuga, is that the changes that you've made?
Yes.
Do you need to go around to see it?
No, I just want to make sure that this is the list, the entire list
Yes.
of the Dr. Harp sheets and Dr. Kazuka's changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other comments regarding this list? I see you. I haven't forgotten about you.
We can move on to the second.
I think there was a comment.
Sorry.
So I know that this is for consumers, so I don't know if this is getting into the weeds too much. But I did want to say, Drs. Kasuga and Dr. Harbsheets, I really appreciate you putting this into categories. Like, that flows well for me as I read them. But I'm looking at the sentence just before that. So in the paragraph that says psychologists also develop, administer, and interpret psychological tests, then the next sentence, some of these psychological tests include the following, and then you have the categories. So when of course, as a clinician, when I hear the word test, I think about specific diagnostic tests, and what you have are categories, and I don't know if we need to just wordsmith that a little bit, or if that's getting too nuancey.
Yeah, I think that I'm sorry. When we were doing this, we just got into the list right away, as opposed to the sentence before the list. But I see your point.
She's saying the word test. Type of tests, I guess.
We could just put some of the categories of psychological tests include the following.
Yeah, I think the distinction between categories and tests is
So they're not expecting like Stanford Binet or whatever,
Right,
like
right,
us,
right.
as opposed to the categories.
Why would it, shouldn't it say evaluations though, because everything says evaluations? And would personality testing fall into diagnostic in any way? That group, or no?
Unless they had subpar intellect. I said unless they had subpar intellect, it probably wouldn't generally be in a personality assessment.
So like some personality testing involve, kind of like categories of personalities. So it's not necessarily diagnosing if someone has a personality disorder.
Okay. Or would it be an evaluation? So you're not, or no? Testing, okay.
So what is the change we're adding to the statement above? Some of these psychological test categories include the following?
Some of these categories of tests or psychological tests include the following.
Some of these categories of psychological tests. Okay, I see it.
Can we say tests and evaluations, or are they different?
I guess I'm just kind of thinking about just what I would understand if I was a parent or seeking psychological services, and what questions might I have. And I think this hits it by telling me that these are categories of psychological tests. And so maybe the test that my psychologist is recommending is not listed here, but I know that these are types of tests that are possible.
Yeah.
It's not like all-inclusive.
Yeah, it's not, it's hard to be all-inclusive, but we try to capture some of the common ones, and we also are trying to be understanding that some of the tests are, a little bit more fancy, so we try to kind of like find the most common ones and most kind of like layman, terms of the.
And I think what's valuable by having it, by at least introducing me to this, that there are different tests in a category, it might help me to ask a better question of the psychologist. Oh, maybe I need a different test that's also in this space, or
Or sometimes, some people don't know that psychologists do these tests, so it's just like an introduction that psychologists do all sorts of tests from, like counseling, testing, to court-ordered ones and stuff.
So are you saying you wanted the sentence that Dr. Phillips recommended with the categories in there instead of the current sentence? Yeah. Okay. It's just not there, though, so I just wanted Dr. Phillips to. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come around.
Oh. And Dr. Winkleman, did you have comments regarding this list? I, I don't-
Just one quick suggestion is, I think fitness for duty are not always court related. I don't know that it matters that much from the consumer protections. I think it's often in a workplace setting, but not necessarily.
That's actually, yeah.
Right now is
Yep.
listed, fitness for duty is under court ordered or court related.
So, right. So your suggestion would be to maybe pull it out because it isn't always court-related, which is accurate. Dr. Kasuga, what do you think?
Do we want to include it or just remove it? It's only
I think it's very important, and they happen often,
yeah.
but not
So
always
we'll
with the
just
court.
have it as its own
Do you want to
category.
have it as a separate category?
That, yeah, standalone.
Category, yeah.
Yeah, unstrike it. And then just take it out of the court-ordered list. It's already separate. Yep. Thank you, Dr. Winkleman.
Thank you.
Are we comfortable with this list?
Has it been changed or no? There you go.
Um,
Okay. Did we change it yet? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one is a small change. Sorry. Sorry, I'm just like, looking at that part.
Is it the one on page 150?
Page 6? Okay, almost there. Now I'm past it. Sorry. This one?
It'll have.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we added this tiny section on
Page 150?
page 150. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. So this is on the paragraph on how to prepare for your first appointment. Dr. Harpsheets and I felt that it was mostly psychotherapy focused, so we added that tiny line. Okay.
Seems good to me.
Okay, the next section, go, sorry.
Sorry. The sentence that says if you're seeing a psychologist for an assessment, is assessment mentioned somewhere else earlier in the document? Because the section that we just reviewed, we talked about testing and evaluation. And so I don't know if a layperson would know what an assessment is and how that differs from psychotherapy.
That's a really good point.
I have so this was not part of the changes, but there's a sentence that says, in the process of beginning a therapeutic relationship, it is that you feel comfortable with that person. I don't know, it just feels a little awkward to me.
Yeah. At the top of that page?
Mm-hmm.
The third
Yeah,
sentence.
150.
Missing a word.
Like it's missing a word,
It's
is
missing a word.
important or something like that? Or-
It's the third line down from the top of the page 150.
Important? Are we missing like important?
No, it's a small word, wait.
Is important that you feel comfortable with that person?
Mm-hmm. It is important. Can we add that? Yeah.
Sorry, I just didn't want to lose Dr. Rogers' point. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like, I think that like we've been using testing, evaluation, and assessment interchangeably, but I think it's good to make it clear because it's not always
Do you
clear.
want to change that word to evaluation or
Or testing?
evaluation or assessment? Do you want to keep both words in there or?
Or should we just say if you're seeing a psychologist for testing?
Mm-hmm, for testing.
Okay, love it.
I think testing is the most
Okay.
common word.
If you're seeing a psychologist for testing. Yes. Thanks, Evan.
And then the biggest change that we did was add a section on what to expect during a psychological assessment, but then we can change it to
During psychological
evaluation.
testing?
Testing. Oh, so that was page 152. Or 12. And the rest of the paragraphs is the addition that we made. Any comments? Yes, Miss, Dr. Rogers, sorry.
Just a question about the term assessor. Since we're using psychologist in the rest of the document, did you want to keep it as assessor? Well, we're changing it to psychological testing now. So just for consistency's sake, do you want to change it to psychologist or?
Clinician?
What line are you looking at?
Oh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you. That's helpful.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I was saying, assessor should still be okay because when we have psychological testing technicians,
Right.
it wouldn't be a psychologist.
That makes sense. Or we could call it the test giver.
So do we change it to a psychological assessment? A psychological test may be comprised of a single session? Or a series of sessions?
You mean at the? And then you would take out the during psychological testing? Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, psychological testing. So we're talking about the first sentence on what to expect during psychological testing. And then Dr. Phillips suggested starting it with psychological testing may be comprised of a single session or a series of sessions.
So taking out assessment and just starting with psychological testing?
Yes.
Okay.
Will we do that for all sentences that start with assessment? Because there are a couple more.
There's a lot of assessment in there.
Yeah. Mr. Gage, perhaps doing a universal change from assessment to test or testing?
Psychological testing for all the assessments.
Any
And
other-
just for grammar, what to expect during a psychological testing session?
The should
Or-
be dropped, shouldn't it, during psychological testing?
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments while we're making the changes to all the assessment?
The both of you did a nice job describing it. I like, it's, a layperson can understand what's happening, and you outlined it nicely.
Thank you.
Dr. Kasuga, I have one other, back on page 150, where it says, you should feel comfortable with that person. It's at the fourth line at the top, with that person. What is everybody's thoughts on changing it to remove that person to your psychologist, or that person feels unprofessional with me? I don't know.
I get what you're saying, that like it's really hard to be comfortable with that person as well. It's quite a sentence.
Well, the word important should be in there, right?
I agree with that.
Yeah, we were adding that, right?
Wait, is it added?
That you feel comfortable with
The person you choose to work with?
your psychologist?
With your, how about your
With your
psychologist?
Your
psychologist.
psychologist, that's what I thought,
Yeah, it's more personable than.
Yeah, it is important, yeah.
Evan, did you see where we're at?
Yes, making the changes in real time, that is a challenge.
It is, no. Have people yelling at you to make changes.
Actually, if we did this on Google Docs and we can all then access the live link, then we wouldn't have to do that. We can track it in real time, all of us on our screens.
Oh, that sounds really complicated.
I didn't say anything, I was like,
I was born in the
half the group.
1950s.
half the group was like, that's awesome, the other half was like,
Say what?
Dr. Phillips says, that seems very cool.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, yeah.
I'm especially I'm interested to hear about the other members that are not psychologists with the description, to see if you have any other suggestions or.
I don't think anybody can you hear her?
Yeah.
I can barely hear her.
you have to move your microphone.
From a layman's perspective, I felt like it reads.
Indulge me.
I felt like it reads clear, and it's helpful to know what to expect when you come through the process, because I think maybe your average person might not fully understand what is under the umbrella of a psychologist versus some of the other mental health professions. So I felt like it was great.
Thank you. And we tried to capture both both needs of just trying to explore oneself, and not just the kind of there's a concern. Sometimes it could be just to get more information about oneself.
I still feel like it should say testing and evaluation, just because it looks like it's separate, but then, I don't know.
Where are you talking about?
In the list.
The list?
And then after that, we kind of forget the word evaluation and just say testing.
Got it. I think we can add that at the start of the list, so that way we can frame that,
Like, I would think, is it different or is it the same? Like, that's my confusion.
What's the question?
Public
Yeah,
comment too.
here, down here.
Oh,
Dr.
I'm sorry.
Sanchez.
Please come forward. We're chatting up here, and if you have comments, please, we'd like to hear them.
Okay, I haven't looked at a psychological evaluation or testing book in a long time, but I suspect that a lot of this will be clearer if someone took a look at how these different categories are described in the text. again, I haven't looked at a text book in a while regarding these issues, but the other thing I noticed, there was nothing about behavioral assessments, which a lot of people do in place of some of the traditional psychological testing. Yeah.
Oh, on the behavioral test, should that be added? That seems like one of those areas that a parent might have a question about. I think about parents.
Or would that fall under the diagnostic evaluations where you have the ADHD already? Because in my head, that would fall under,
I don't know, they use so many behavioral checklists now for
Yes.
people, for teachers, for parents, for children do self-assessment sometimes.
Yeah.
It might be good to put in behavioral
Yeah.
assessment
as a separate,
as a separate category.
okay.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Forgot my own pin. 142. Yes. And then I just don't want to forget the comment with regards to testing and evaluation.
Wait, before Evan leaves this page, so we want it to say behavioral,
Dr. Kasuga, did you want it here on page 2 when we list all the different evaluations, the testing/evaluation? Maybe somewhere in that, some of
List?
these psychological evaluations/tests include?
Or just say tests and evaluations,
Okay.
because I think that's probably easier for people to read through.
You see, Evan or Mr. Gage, some of these categories of psychological tests or evaluations include the following.
Is that okay?
And then below personality testing, is that where you would add behavioral testing?
Yes. I'm actually just, thinking whether it's behavioral testing or behavioral measures.
behavioral checklists, behavioral
Behavioral
measures.
assessment. but then
behavioral
we get back on that
assessments.
assessment word.
We're back to assessment then.
Because you're really not testing the behavior,
No,
it's
it's
just measures or
Behavioral assessment is what I would call it.
Called behavioral assessments, actually.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
call them assessments, but,
Yeah, so just put behavioral
No, it's a
assessments.
behavioral
yeah, because
assessment.
it's the one that makes more sense.
I think so.
We'll make an exception for behavior.
Okay,
and
it's
add
on
assessment.
there. He got it.
Okay.
Anything else, Dr. Kasuga?
Those were all the edits that Dr. Harpsheets and I did, and I'll pass it on to Dr. Phillips.
Yeah, I fell down on the job on this one. I posed questions back to staff. So we're going to page 146, but I have drafted language now that I realize that I had totally screwed up. So, I mean, the original discussion was, should we be giving a special shout out to Psychology Today as opposed to, and whatever the other therapy thing was, instead of Therapy Tribe, or, I mean, there's like 400 million things like that. And I continue to pose that question there. So here's what my suggestion for the language would be. I will read it out loud and maybe we can type it out and see how it looks. Where the hell are we going? Oh, conduct an online search using third-party sites such as local, state, and national professional associations, insurance company directories, then we can get rid of the insurance company directories of approved providers, and listings compiled by publications. Listings compiled by publications. I don't want to say Psychology Today. I mean, it's kind of an endorsement of Psychology Today, I think.
I like it.
Did you? Or do we just call it other online lists? I mean, frankly, if you search for therapy, Psychology Today is probably going to come up in your Google search really high.
Could we say media or journalism or something?
Journals has a special meaning in psychology. It usually means a peer-reviewed journal. But maybe we could say listings compiled, or we could just say online lists. So let me read it to you again with that modification. And I will give this to you, Evan, in a way that makes sense. So it would be conduct an online search using third-party sites such as local, state, and national professional associations, insurance company directories of approved providers. Okay, let me start over. I didn't realize you were going to try to type it yet. Okay, I'll go real slow. So it'd be where the hell am I? There we are. I'm getting so damn tired. Okay, conduct an online search using third-party sites such as local, state, and national professional associations. Local, state, and national professional associations, insurance company directories of approved providers. And what would we say for the last part of it? And online lists? And we could say an online lists of providers. Oh, and we could just say other lists of providers. Yeah. Other lists of providers? Yeah. I'm not worried about Psychology Today getting squeezed out. They're pretty good at doing what they do. I know that we should strike the next line. And they'll give you like 3 names or something like that. I think you're really better going in the directories than you are. Should we say, or call your insurance provider?
Yes, and as a person who will refuse to call anybody as the last possible thing on my list, I mean, one could say you could email your insurance provider as well, or contact.
Okay,
or
contact.
So, as a phone-phobic person.
I also want to reorder these a little bit. I'd like to move the part, ask people you know and trust for their recommendations, including your healthcare providers, to the top. That's really your best source of a referral. Well, then they'll tell you they had a bad experience. You won't call that person, right? So I think that ask people you know and trust should go to the top of the list as opposed to email Dr. Stephen Phillips. He's endlessly patient.
Oh, yeah. Okay, one more edit. Do you want to say it?
Well, Evan, where it says check with your insurance provider for a list of approved psychologists, do we want that instead of check with to say contact your insurance?
Yeah. We're bombarding them with a lot of changes.
Not that one. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Ron, I like your Google idea. Even if it's just 3 of us doing it, I think it would make more sense. Yeah.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to have to. My eyes are really tired.
You can see him on the webs, I tried to the webinar. I can't. I tried to get on the webinar just to see. He's gonna be like walking around on the webinar. But there's no link on the site. The webcast. On the webcast. It's usually delayed, so hopefully they can. Here, look, so we go to board meeting. Oh, yeah. Says webcast. Oh, okay, so it takes you to the calendar. Then I click here. Where are the details? So I don't know, is it? How do you actually get in?
It doesn't go on the link?
Mm-mm. This is what I get.
I thought you just clicked the link, sorry. I haven't been on it
There
for a
should be a
while.
link here, that's why. I don't know what's going on. But at this point, it's like.
It looks super, and we added in an Oxford comma and everything.
Okay. Did we get it? Dr. Phillips, we captured the whole thing?
It beautifully captures all my thoughts on that subject,
Okay.
and we'd really like to obliterate the blue box, because that's me dithering in the middle of the night.
Okay. Any other board comment regarding Dr. Phillips' changes, suggested changes? Any public comment regarding Dr. Phillips' suggested changes? I see eyebrows, Dr. Winkleman. Are you good? Okay. They're going up, so I
think the
didn't.
eyebrows will keep on moving. eyebrows.
Okay, okay.
It was Dr. Winkleman who actually raised it because the California Psychological Association wasn't listed, yeah.
Saw her eyebrows moving, so thought maybe she had a comment. I didn't know. Do we need a motion to move forward with this pamphlet that we've seen now 3 times? There's eyebrows right there. I see them.
So moved.
Oh, sorry. Wait a minute, what? What just happened? We had a back and forth, eyebrows. Okay, now it's your time.
I thought you meant just about this section, because there's one other section that I still do have a comment on.
Oh, okay. Well, please.
And that is the one that says about abandonment prematurely. It's on page 14 in the hard copy. I don't know what it is in yours. Stalked, even attacked by a patient. So there are situations which is acknowledged in our ethics code, which says provide referrals as appropriate, where I would ask that you consider changing that so it just doesn't say they should never do that, because there are some circumstances in which you're not going to be able to, very rare circumstances, which a psychologist should.
How about if we said except under special circumstances?
I don't think that's, I don't know, I think that as a patient, that might be confusing, because they're like, well, what's under the special circumstance? So I don't have a ready solution. I just wanted to,
Or in most cases, comma, which is kind of more common language.
that would be fine with me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Sheets,
So you like in most cases?
Most cases.
In most cases, comma.
You're looking for it, Evan?
Then you have to say prematurely ending.
I think we did talk about it.
Oh. So then it should be prematurely ending then, shouldn't it?
In most cases, prematurely ending.
This is, no, this is
Right.
coming under psychologists should never, prematurely end the treatment relationship.
Oh,
That's not it.
oh, it's a list, isn't it?
A list under never.
Keep going,
and then-
down.
I think it still works.
Oh, he can't go down. No, no, yes. Right there.
Oh, number 14. Sorry. I moved away from it.
Oh, prematurely end does make sense then.
Oh, there.
In most cases, prematurely ending the treatment.
I think it's
It-
okay.
It reads strange just as a sentence alone. You almost have to refer back up.
Never.
Oh, I see.
Would it be better then, just for continuity of psychologists should never, can you put in parens in most cases at the end?
Or,
Okay.
At the risk of
Or
adding to the
what
word.
about instead of taking out without, so in most cases, prematurely ending treatment should continue, or should contain discussion of well, but take out, instead of having without in there, make it a positive, like.
I don't get it.
In most cases, prematurely ending the treatment relationship should include a continuity of care, should include.
That's right. You're saying in most cases, psychologists should not prematurely end the treatment relationship without discussing options for continuity of care. That's basically what it's saying.
Okay, I was just trying to.
It doesn't say psychologist.
No, that's up higher. It's a list of things psychologists shouldn't do.
I just was saying that's what it's saying. 'Cause
Yeah.
Here it says psychologists should
In most
never
cases, prematurely
engage
ending.
in chores, and then down here, should never, in most cases, prematurely end the treatment relationship without discussing.
Okay, so it's in, not ending. In most cases,
Should provide.
In most cases, prematurely end the treatment relationship
without.
See, these are all present tense,
Uh-huh.
engage,
Yeah,
and.
but you see what he has? It says, in most cases, comma, prematurely end the the treatment relationship without discussing options for continuity of care.
I think we can leave it that way.
It's all present tense.
We can leave it that way, actually.
Yeah, that's good.
Can I throw out another option? Just again for flow, psychologists should never, because I'm assuming we might get a little pushback from the publications unit when they're checking for grammar and things like that. I'm wondering if that needs to be a standalone sentence after the prematurely end the treatment relationship without discussing options for continuity of care, and then you can have its own sentence in rare cases where the safety of the psychologist is in question, that individual,
It's more
may not, blah, blah,
complicated.
blah.
It's more complicated than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think having it as a standalone sentence is grammatically going to make more sense.
Okay.
You take it out of the list. And then you could say, in most cases, psychologists should not prematurely terminate the treatment relationship without discussing continuity of care.
Plus, it's a consumer guide, so
Oh, maybe just take it out of the list.
Think they're gonna attack their psychologist.
Yeah. So just take the bullet off and then have it,
Make it a separate sentence.
yeah,
Make it a
okay.
separate entry.
That, and that would flow better. Yeah.
But it's beyond safe, there's more than safety reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people may not be able to pay you anymore, pay you the agreed amount that you were.
Yeah, they're not participating effectively.
They won't participate in the treatment, they're using substances, I mean, lots of things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because now it needs it needs to say psychology.
In most cases,
Psychologist.
psychologists should not prematurely end the treatment relationship without discussing options for continuity of care.
And psychologist doesn't have to be capitalized.
Dr. Winkleman, you were going to say something, but I,
No, that's,
okay, is this better?
I think it's fine with me,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, thanks.
We good? And this is, we're back in public comment for the whole document. Is there any more, is this your last comment, or did you have some other suggestions for us?
No, I think my last comment's just going to be thank you all.
Well, thank you for coming. And if I recall, I think we did we have a motion? Or we were talking about it? No, we don't have a motion. Do we need a motion to move forward with this pamphlet? That's what I was saying.
I move that we accept the document, what's it called?
As amended?
Exactly.
As amended.
Board publication for your peace of mind, as edited.
I second. Go ahead. Rogers.
Perfect, thank you. Any other board comment? We have a motion and a second. Any other public comment? This is your time. Thank you, bringing it back. Ms. Bruto, can you please call the roll?
Kasuga. Aye. Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheets.
Aye.
Nystrom. Aye. Phillips.
Aye.
Friscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Thank you.
Perfect, motion passes. I'm going to head right on through. Is that okay, or you do need a break? Okay, we can all take a 5-minute break. 4:15, come on back, please. Ms. Bruto, can you please call the roll?
Kasuga.
Here.
Cervantes.
Here.
Fu.
Here.
Harpsheets.
Here.
Nystrom. Phillips.
Here.
Friscate. Rogers.
Here.
Tate.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, and quorum has been reestablished, and we are zooming ahead to agenda item 19, review and propose edits to draft survey questions to assess barriers to telehealth. And these are questions we have seen in November and other times. So I'm open to hearing board comment about the recent changes. Mr. Burke, do you have some comments before, or?
I don't know, other than, yes, the board saw this language in November. There were quite substantial edits made. The executive officer and I were tasked with going and discussing the language informally with the Department of Consumer Affairs, Equity Office, to see if they had any guidance. They had some informal pointers, after which Ms. Orick and I met and sort of created the draft questions that you see now. We were going for brevity, clarity, with the understanding that a briefer survey will be more likely to be answered than a longer one. So that's why we combine questions. And this was taking into consideration the advice from the Department of Consumer Affairs, although they obviously have no formal position on this survey one way or the other at this time. The only point I have of order, it's actually a drafting error, I'm afraid, on the provider survey. The second sentence is sort of a remnant of the track changes, and it should, we intended for it to be deleted. The one that begins sort of randomly out of this landscape, that sentence we had intended to delete. That's all I had. It's now for the
Okay.
board's consideration.
Okay, so let's open it up to the board and see if there are any comments or suggestions. Dr. Cervantes?
I have a suggestion. With this survey, it would be, with any survey, it's helpful to have questions on demographics. That helps with the analysis of the data. And so, keeping with brevity, I want to recommend that we add a question for the respondent to give us a county of where they, for the providers, maybe where they practice. Because I don't know that we care where they live. It's more about where they're providing service, right? I think it would be helpful. And maybe another demographic question where we provide, it's like age ranges, so we get ages of the respondents. I think there might be other
Is that of the providers or the consumers, the age?
Probably both. I think it's relevant to the other data points that we have from the discussion this morning about the workforce. If there might be other demographic questions, I'm just trying to keep it simple on age and county because it'll lead to a better analysis.
On counties, because some of the areas are kind of tight, would it be better to do it regional?
If we have capacity to do that, I'm sure.
I was just wondering.
I'm imagining this would be like a drop-down for which, for providers, add what county do you primarily practice in? And it would be a drop-down menu with the different counties. And then for the consumers, add what county do you reside in with the drop-down. And then for the age of the provider and the consumer, we can say what age group best describes you, and then we can do a few groupings. And we can look at maybe Department of Finance or one of the others for typically how they gather their data. I like to kind of keep our demographic data consistent with how the state collects demographic data. And I was going to say one other thing, and I forgot what I was going to say. I will think about it.
And maybe it's just me, but the curiosity on the age of the provider is the issue that was illustrated earlier about the proportion of psychologists that are nearing retirement age, and I think that could inform how we pass policy, but maybe even influence the training programs of where they might sharpen the training. But just two demographic suggestions. There's gazillions, but I just want to keep it simple too.
Well, now that you bring that up, I think it should have, there should be just like when you take other surveys where there's a separate demographic portion to it, so it's not in these questions. And then you combine that data, because we're asking about barriers, cultural barriers, language barriers, and not knowing the background, it's not going to really be that helpful. We're going to be missing information without it. So you know how like you take a test and before that they're like, it's optional if you want to include those things. We should have that here.
So you want age, geographical data, racial ethnicity data. Okay, and drop-downs.
Yeah. But it always has to be optional though, I think. I don't know if that's like a, yeah, so it would be like just a separate component, and I don't think that would deter people because most people that take surveys are used to.
It being truncated
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah. Why do research?
Any other suggestions from the board?
Because then it doesn't make, you have to say it and it's like, oh, cultural barriers. Ooh.
I don't know if this is a question or, it's just a thought that came up when Dr. Cervantes was talking about geographical location, because I'm thinking about telehealth, and now because telehealth is available, you can see someone anywhere in the state, right? So should we have a category for maybe where, I don't know if you can say like where is your provider based, because I can see people that have reached out to me from LA, right, or the Bay Area. They do,
Yeah, that
yeah.
does make sense.
So I don't know if that's a category that needs to be included as well,
Oh,
because
that would be interesting.
I think that would be helpful in knowing rural areas if maybe they are accessing it, but somewhere else.
Mhm.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
the whole thing is a telehealth, questionnaire.
That's a
So,
questionnaire, so I would be curious to know if people are receiving telehealth from providers in their city where they reside, or are they looking in other areas simply because they can, or maybe there's a provider that meets their, preferred demographic, who might not necessarily be local.
But they might not know. I know my therapist last year was part of a group, and I knew it was telehealth. She was California, but I didn't know where she was.
Mm-hmm.
So the person might not know where the person's providing telehealth
Sure.
from.
Yeah. Or where they live, all of the providers might be full. And so maybe they're looking in other areas. I know I've had that happen where, everyone I've reached out to in the Bay Area is full, so now I'm looking outside to see if I can connect with a provider.
I think I just want to say what I think is an interesting, like, policy-wise, right, from the presentation earlier and what we already knew, which was that this psychology workforce, or even the whole mental health, behavioral health workforce, is not evenly distributed. And I think that's probably what's triggering for all of us to think about, well, where are they and how are they feeling about it?
Couldn't we say that rural, urban, exurban, suburban? I mean, couldn't we capture some of that by a drop-down menu? I don't know we're going to be able to track all the geographical distances between providers.
I will just say, one of the things with that I was speaking with Dr. Cervantes at the break about was that county data is something that we have historically pulled when we've done like providers by county. I don't know if you guys remember, we did a, provider to patient ratio where we listed how many for all the mental health professions, how many per county, and we shared that information with HCI, which was OSHPD, so that when they looked at their loan repayment, they knew where the focus was and where the need was. From staff's perspective, it may be helpful to stay consistent on the county issue and have it be a drop-down.
Yeah.
And then just so I know for the other demographics, so for age, gender, race, ethnicity, that could be an optional piece that we can add in. That, as you were saying, Ms. Riscate, wouldn't be something they would have to fill out in order to participate in the survey, but they could, and it would be helpful to have that information if they do fill it out.
Then, I don't know if the state's generic demographic list has done this, but we also add like gender identity, because now those things make a big difference to make sure that it's specific and inclusive. So I don't know how inclusive we want to be, but we usually do gender identity or how's that one? Orientation? Do we still say?
Sexual orientation.
Yeah, I think so. We still say that. So, I mean, if we wanted to include that, but that would provide more information for LGBTQ plus stuff.
In speaking with Ms. Sorka, I think as I understand it, the questionnaire would have a notice or a disclaimer that any of the information collected is not identifiable with the respondent, so that hopefully will help people feel more comfortable in answering some of those questions.
any other board comment?
Wow, a lot of people are going to want this data when we have it.
I know. I have to,
Madam President, if it's appropriate, I'm happy to approve the attached draft survey questions as amended with today's discussion to assess barriers to telehealth.
there a second?
I second.
Perfect.
And delegate to the executive officer to make any technical non-substantive changes.
Do we need to specify that the the additions are in the demographic category in the motion.
Any other board comment before I open it up for public comment? Public comment, please, regarding agenda item 19. Please come forward and have a seat. No? Okay. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
As Dr. Elizabeth Winkleman is in the audience, I will just say that we will be reaching out to all of our stakeholders to help us get this survey distributed, and then we'll be releasing that as a public document once we gather the data and provide that at a future board meeting once that survey is closed.
Okay, I'm bringing it back to the board. Any other comments? Okay, before I call the roll, I have to say Mr. Fu and I had this conversation about this in 2020. So this is like years later. We're coming to fruition. So please call the roll.
Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harb Sheets.
Aye.
Nystrom. Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye. Motion passes. Item number 20, this is recommendations for agenda items for future board meetings, and the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. This is a public comment time. If you would like to give us some suggestions, please come forward and have a seat. I'm not seeing any movement. Before, though, I adjourn this meeting, I have one last, did you have something, Dr. Kasuga?
I want to include my regular addition request for meditation.
Oh, I think it's already on there. You
Okay.
did, but thank you, but it's on there. And Mr. Fu?
I was like getting promoted to doctor by you, Dr. Tate.
You saw it, right?
Given today's conversation about behavioral health workforce, if it's appropriate for another presentation from OSHPAD about the scholarship program that psychological fees go to or to contribute would be really helpful.
Mr. Fu, I'm wondering if that is typically an update we get at the summer, and it's kind of the end of the or beginning of the fiscal year once they can capture that. I'm wondering if the workforce development portion of HCI would be someone you would be interested in hearing from as a presenter to talk about not just the loan repayment program, which we get an update on, but just on workforce shortage initiatives and projects that they're working on.
Oh, that would be fabulous. Yeah.
Okay.
And but future meeting as in any time in 2023. It doesn't have to be May.
Perfect. Any other suggestions? And we got the suggestion from Mr. Lavarello's presentation, bringing Vault in. Okay, perfect. That is great. I have two items though before. So if you're here for CPD credit, please make sure you sign out with Ms. McCochran. Hello, Ms. McCochran. And the last but very, very not least, today is Mr. Burke's birthday. And Mr. Burke said it'd be lovely if we could sing happy birthday to him, which we're going to do right now. Thank you.
Mic's on?
Oh, mic's on. That'd be kind of fun. Everyone's mic's on.
Depends on the quality of your voice. Mine's not that good.
Okay, ready? And I'm not the singer, but I love karaoke. Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear
Mr. Burke.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Of course, and our meeting is now adjourned, so enjoy your weekend.